good to be back in New York City, back at the Strand, with Volume 5, the end of what is Season 1 of The Familiar. It's strange to be done with something. It's still not quite beginning the next thing. It's kind of between a breath. It's in that moment when it's no longer yesterday and it's no longer tomorrow. It's just midnight at any time. And I guess let's inhabit that moment together for a few minutes, what it's like to be in between a place. I'd like to start with something from House of Leaves. Does anyone have a copy I could borrow? Just throw it. Author felled by his own book. And let's start with the very end, with Old Man's Zampano, or Zampano, or however you like to pronounce it, his notes. When you have a name like Danielewski, you learn to get used to many pronunciations. March 14th, 1969. Who has never killed an hour? Not casually or without thought, but carefully. A premeditated murder of minutes. The violence comes from a combination of giving up, not caring, and a resignation that getting past it is all you can hope to accomplish. So you kill the hour. You do not work, you do not read, you do not daydream. If you sleep, it is not because you need to sleep. And when at last it is over, there is no evidence, no weapon, no blood, and no body. The only clue might be the shadows beneath your eyes, or a terribly thin line near the corner of your mouth, indicating something has been suffered, that in the privacy of your life you have lost something, and the loss is too empty to share. July 27th, 1991. Make no mistake, those who write long books have nothing to say. Of course, those who write short books have even less to say. December 18th, 1996. The cats have been dying, and everyone wonders why. I can hear my neighbors murmur. They murmur all the time. It's strange. Some cats die, some just disappear. No one knows why. Redwood. I saw him once a long time ago, when I was young. I ran away, and luckily, or no luck at all, he did not follow me. But now I cannot run. And anyway, this time, I am certain he would follow. Thank you. So let's jump into Redwood. This is from a Xanther chapter. It's called It's Super Gentle. And the epigraph is Sorry Kid from The Matrix. Takes place around 5:30 p.m., September 17th, 2014. And because in these readings there are few people that are speaking, I'm going to essay an accent of sorts here and there. But it's really just to prod your own imaginative, performative minds to lend me a far better performance than I can enact here. Why isn't Dr. Caldwell telling us this? Xanther asks, never anticipating the question, the words just slipping out, though without any edge or tone. Dwight Plager nods a lot, looking at walls then and throwing his head like to get his bangs out of his face, though he doesn't have bangs or any hair in his face, probably because there's enough gel or hairspray to keep all those layers locked in place. Oh, there it is. Xanther has the answer. Dr. Caldwell likes him a lot. I was just about to posit that. Meaning before pointing that out, you were thinking that? Good question, fair question. Alice is a good doctor, so good, loves animals and saves them. Boy, does she save them, so many, many. But she's also really, really sensitive, which comes out like an accusation, with those immovable covering stones momentarily seeking out Xanther again. Alice handles most everything here, but there's one part she leaves to others, or in this case, to me. Does Dr. Caldwell, Astaire begins, redressing Dwight's familiarity first, is she recommending that our pet be put down now? It's something she's considering. Alice asked me to come and take a look and let you know what I think. But before I can let you know what I think, I do have to take a look. Dwight steps toward Xanther again, and now Xanther's the one who wants to charge. Shove him aside, get out the door, out down the strange orange hallway, out into the sunny Los Angeles day she knows is waiting. Even if this wish starts dimming at once, like the day is already dimming, ending, even if Xanther knows there's at least a good hour before the sun goes, feeling it in here already setting, and no windows either, a sinking into darkness that seems to sizzle and pop and gasp. Did little one just gasp? Hey, Dwight adds, opening his arms and grandly stepping aside. Her escape as easy as a few steps. If you know he's not in pain, take him home, please. Sure makes my job easier. Don't think for a moment I get off on this. Again, that wrong smile, though at least it isn't his I'm so sad, we're so sad face. And at least Astaire's smile in response is genuine, because hers is sad. He is suffering, Xanther answers, hating herself for saying it, though it's the truth. She's known it for a while, too, can feel it even now, in the way his little back paws have started a series of tiny rabbit kicks against her chest. Okay, all right, let's see where we're at. Xanther, defeated, gently returns the bindle of soaking sweater back to the examination table. Dwight slowly pulls back the cashmere, and the little one seems to unfold with it too, stretching out, not in that feel-good way, but more in that way of letting go that comes with exhaustion, flopping on his side, hind legs wet, chest wet, breathless. With air so small, with breath so small, air, if air could speak, would claim no exchange. Oh man, yeah. At least Dwight doesn't touch him. See that? He's breathing through his mouth now. Man, I'm so sorry. You never want to see cats doing that. How had Xanther been so blind? Though, like, of course, it was obvious now. As soon as this guy said it, her little one was way worse than before. Xanther feels the room bend even toward darkness, as if darkness held back by every day could do that to walls and corners, rounding them before driving them down toward an inescapable center. Xanther's lips and fingertips tingle then with a crackle, singeing every surface between herself and little one. She even tries resting one palm on him, as if touch might stop it, her palm nearly covering him. Xanther's hand, a hand with a tail. Did she know he was so small? Of course she knew. Is he getting smaller? Does it matter? Especially in the way everything keeps crackling around her, so much so that it seems the world itself could in this moment just flash away, burned up in the instantiation of its future, this future. And of course, that's when, oh wow, Xanther realizes what she should have recognized when she left home. Just how much that strange blue acorn is burning now, as much at the heart of her as it remains beyond her, hotter than ever before, and for one thing turning to ash all her plans to smuggle the little cat out of the house, as a way to keep that flame extinguished, or at least dampened, and for another thing drawing Xanther back to that familiar forest that now might as well be a forest of burning stone. You think he's cycling too? Xanther asks. No question, Dwight answers solemnly, or how solemn tries to be when it's not, unable to get away from that big-toothed smile, another swish of blonde hair. Xanther nods. She catches, too, what looks like a wince crossing Astaire's face, like the admission of what's plain as day is too painful even for Astaire. And she was the one who had wanted a dog. Xanther suddenly feels sorry for her mom, that she had managed to come around a little, only to wind up here. Do any animals who are cycling, Xanther continues, pressing toward the hardest question, which, when it comes out, feels as clear and direct as anything Dove might have mustered. Do any of them go on to live? Did Astaire gasp? Yes. No, Dwight answers, shaking his head too, his face darkening despite the halo of perfect hair, but also in this weird way that makes his bright smile seem still bigger, even brighter. Xanther can't make sense of him. He unsettles her, even if she knows he doesn't matter. Only little one matters. Alice, man, like I already said, such a good heart. She can get close to the edge, real close, especially if there's a chance that she can bring back whatever living thing she's taking care of back from the edge. But over the years, she's just gotten way too sensitive. It's maybe what makes her such a great vet. But when it's clear she can't help anymore, Dwight lets his voice trail off. When she can't help, we get you, Astaire snaps, her fierceness returning. Sure, I mean, I'm qualified to do this, but I'm not a vet, Dwight answers, almost lazily. If you feel more comfortable, you know, like you'd prefer a licensed practitioner, there are other vets here. I'm happy to get one. They cost more, but we all do the same thing. We use sodium pentobarbital with a combination of other drugs to make sure your pet goes peacefully and painlessly. We like to give good life dignity by ending the suffering. Dignity? Xanther asks. The question, if it is a question, racing her heart something awful, maybe because the answer so eludes her, and touch sure is no help, even if her cupped palm over Slimsy little one keeps trying to feel it, as if feeling alone was an irrefusable commandment granting even the most slender creature the power of human speech. When Xanther withdraws her hand, nothing in that soak of misery even hints at dignity. The question you have to answer is, hey, do you want him to keep hurting? Who are you? Astaire starts to bark. Mom, it's okay. He's right. That is the question. And one certainty now bound up in the charging beats of her heart is that Xanther will do anything to keep her dear little friend from suffering. But what stops her heart, too, is the question of whether or not to end suffering is a legitimate reason to end life. Never before has Xanther wanted so much for a seizure to take her down, drop her to the floor, tumble her into that awful catsom, keep her out for hours, absolve her from having to make this gruesome decision. But of course, no seizure comes. No seizure for little one either, though a tiny groan coupled with a pained sigh lifts and defeats his chest. Dwight Plager steps to the counter where he starts to lay out a syringe, some bottles of drugs, other stuff. Unless you decide otherwise, and hey, really, take your time, but unless you decide otherwise, I will first have to take your animal to another room. Don't worry, nothing will happen there. I just need to set up an IV thingy so everything goes smoothly in here. Then I'll wait until you're ready, and when you are, he'll just go to sleep. It's super gentle. It's a cheery little piece. I said we were going to midnight. This next bit concerns a very different character named Oscar. He's a LAPD detective, and this chapter is entitled Jasper. You Can't Be Trusted, Miles Davis. 6:22 p.m., September 17th, 2014. Then that's it? Cletus Boo asks. That's it, Oscar answers, accepting another pour from the old man. I gotta say, I never figured you for retirement, Cletus chuckles. That reality just never crossed my mind. Doing something crazy for a lady makes sense, but not retiring for one. Oscar checks his watch. If he lingers any longer, he'll be late. Cletus takes no offense. Don't fret, I'll call you another one in a sec. Thanks. Not the first time a cab got lost around here. A bullet hole that made no difference to Oscar still got Captain Cardinal ordering the car to the shop for a patch and paint job. Can't have people thinking it's open season on police. Oscar obeyed. though it's not really the reason he's cabbing it tonight. Katla. Oscar drains the small glass. When he'd arrived an hour ago, Cletus set out a 1-liter bottle of beer and 2 small glasses. As if small would limit big. As it turns out, small stays empty as big tries to keep up. Katla, Katla, Katla. Where's your dinner? Cletus asks, refilling both their glasses, finishing the bottle. Red Lion. Glendale Boulevard? You can get a beer there in a glass boot. Oscar nods. Though he's had enough beer. Scotch is next. Good or bad, it doesn't matter, so long as he has a few. Virgil will understand. He better. He's buying. Celebrating the news of Oscar's move to New Jersey and a life of gardening in gray. Haven't been in years, though once went enough to know the regulars. Oscar wonders if he'll run into anyone from those days. The air tonight seems charged with that possibility, ready to catch fire with the unexpected. Katla, Katla, Katla. They find that lion in the mountains yet? Cletus asks. Last I heard, she's still up there, Oscar responds. Sheesh. Can't wait to hear what happens next. The TV in his kitchen has only the weather. The TV in the living room is all about a Medal of Honor recipient, Sergeant Major Benny Atkins, who killed 175 enemy combatants. That and being stalked or saved by a tiger. Oscar didn't hear which. He prefers the weather, hot, no chance of rain. I guess something has to happen. Lion that big, that mean, you know she's going to turn up somewhere, and it won't be pretty. Katla, Katla. Oscar's glad to find Cletus found a good mood. He wasn't sure how he'd take the news. Maybe because Oscar still believes that Cletus sees in him a last chance to still get some justice for Jasper, his murdered boy. Though maybe it isn't that way at all. Maybe at this point, they're just friends. To Jasper, Oscar suddenly says, lifting his empty glass. Cletus holds out his hand, heads to the refrigerator, twists off the cap of another 1-liter bottle of beer, sits down, refills both their glasses. Katla, Katla, Katla. To you, Oz. I'm gonna miss you, man. Oscar's mouth goes dry, the kind of dry that's beyond the help of anything wet. New Jersey's not so far away. Yeah, right. Might as well be Kazakhstan. Cletus breaks out in a big laugh, gets up again. For another bottle? To call a second cab? But he just heads out of the kitchen. Oscar hears a door open, hears the water start to run. Oscar had gone too far. It had been a nice visit. Too bad getting back to nice now won't be so easy. Oscar gets up and pours into the sink what's left of his beer. Now on both TVs is a story about Operation Fashion Police. 2 Mexican drug cartels were caught laundering money in LA warehouses and storefronts down in the fashion district. $65 million in cash seized. The story briefly interests him, and then interest dims, followed by a sensation of easy relief, because a dumb news story isn't the only thing easing away. All his cases are losing their hold, plus those that were never his. Marvin Dorgandrell, a.k.a. Android, Yuri Grossman, Eli Klein, and Yablom Lao Song. Raylik S. Tarnin, questions about that wackadoodle warlock, questions about bleach, about ammonia. All that urgency just fading. Katla, Katla. Others will pick up the threads, tie things together, net the worst ones, or not. It doesn't matter anymore. Oscar served his time, hauled in his share of maniacs, good men like Detectives Perry and Carter, even Captain Cardinal, even Belasco will carry on the job of justice. They'll have help, too. Angels like Plansky, like Virgil. What was that Rawls quote Virgil loved? Justice is the first virtue of social institutions. Oscar checks his watch again. Where's that cab? He hears a flush, but Cletus still doesn't return. Why had Oscar brought up Jasper? But even Jasper was fading away, and the lightness of all these departures, they'd been departing for a while now, leave him feeling free and strange, but also at the same time sad. Katla, 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 Katla. Oscar slides across the counter, an origami honey badger, leaves it beside the bottle, reconsiders the beer. Instead, Oscar heads for the front door. Through the metal security screen, he spies his taxi idling curbside. I thought you should have this. Cletus says. Oscar's relieved to turn around and find Cletus smiling. Oscar probably just mistook a full bladder for heartache. Until the gift makes him rethink that. It'll mean a world to me to think you'll have a reason now and then to look on this and think of him. It's a framed piece of sheet music, the first page of Rhapsody in Blue. He could play it too. Those pencil markings are his. I framed it for you. It'll hang where I'll always see it. I got tired, Oz, of thinking about who did it. More and more I accepted that whoever done it was already gotten by something else, or would be soon enough. Maybe by that lion in the mountains. Cletus' smile seems to widen because the joke doesn't land. And then, you know, I got tired of even thinking about Jasper. Really, really tired. Like a fall asleep forever tired. I got so afraid I'd sleep so long, I'd wake and find Jasper gone, forgotten. That I still can't risk. Oscar nods. The cab is honking. He has to get going. He needs a real drink. I used to drive trucks. You know that. Mostly city routes, San Gabriel Valley, maybe a little farther north. Now and then, though, I did longer hauls. Those can be great. All night with no one to tell you what to do but the road. But sometimes you get so damn tired. You drink your Cokes, your coffee, you roll down the windows and take some cold air in the teeth. But if that don't work, you know what you do? You take out your wallet. It's got to be full too, with your license, your ATM card, all your plastic lifelines. But most of all, it's got to have your cash. Then you hang that out the window, holding on tight. That keeps you wide awake. The taxi had stopped honking. Cletus, you tired now? Oscar asks. Oh yeah, but I'm still up. Window down. You get it, Oz, Cletus smiles. This time because meaning did land. One hand on the wheel and one hand in the wind. Holding on to your wallet, holding on to something. Thank you. Questions? All right, I guess we're done.
I know it's painful to go first, but if you do raise your hand, I will try to bring you a microphone.
Hi, thank you for coming. I guess my question would be, so you named this novel Redwood, and you read that piece from House of Leaves, but I believe there was a Redwood that you wrote before House of Leaves that you tore up, and I'm wondering, did you name this novel, this specific, segment, after that original book in part?
So is it about the book or is it about the content of that? It wasn't quite a book. It was sort of a screenplay, really. Play, I don't know. Well, I wouldn't say that I named it. I think it sort of named itself. And I don't think it's really about what was on the page, but really sort of what was growling underneath the page. So I think it was, I've often said, I remember one of the things that was so exciting to me, I think it was probably around high school, but when I sort of got what meaning was, when that word became part of my lexicon, like this has such meaning. And it's certainly part of the world of letters, of literature. It's like, what has meaning? And probably we've all had that experience where we start to go, oh, yeah, but what is meaning? Like, does that chance moment have meaning? Or like, it gets to be a very complicated construct, and it's not entirely accurate, or it's extremely fuzzy. And so what I did was I sort of drilled down into that word eventually, and I discovered that, at least for myself, meaning is that which survives. If it didn't survive at all, it would have no meaning. It would be absent. Now there's a kind of meaning to that, but there's a thought that creates that meaning, that makes of absence meaning. But in my life, I've often thought, like, there are things that just don't go away. And Redwood was something like that. Even before the story that I wrote on a Greyhound bus for my father called Redwood, there was still Redwood. There was an earlier version. So Redwood keeps commanding me in some way to tell this story. And it's in honor of him. And for those of you who haven't read any of this, there's a lot of kind of polarities, I guess, is sort of a simple way of looking at this. You know, you look at free animals, at caged animals. You look at, you know, of extremely violent people, extremely, you know, gentle people. And certainly you have, in the segment I wrote, an image of a very fragile creature which is on the very precipice of dying. And then that's counterpointed by the title of this volume, which speaks of an immense power. So I think I walked the spoiler line perfectly there. There's a question here, all right.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Could you talk a little bit about your process for, I guess, writing, but more so research? Because I noticed for all your House of Leaves, Only Our Illusions, there just seems like so much research, especially in the Familiar series that I've read so far. So could you talk a little bit about, like, people, I mean, authors often talk about writing, their process for writing. Could you talk about research, though?
So you just ask how I write, right?
Essentially.
I think the word that came to mind immediately was involvement, you know, and I think it pertains to every writer in this room, but every artist or everyone who's in a relationship. It's how you involve yourself. So there's research, there's writing, and in my case, there's also typesetting, and it's kind of a trinity, a triumvirate that's happening all the time. And it is this kind of weird relationship where you get to a place where you don't know what's going on, and at that moment it requires an imaginative leap where you literally make something up, or you feel like, I really don't know enough, and that's the moment when you pause and you go to research something. But research is weird, right? Because it doesn't happen linearly. So the moment at the end between Cleitius and Oscar is one of my favorites, and that happened researching stuff long ago, and that was just, you know, someone told me that story, and it was like, where does that live? But it was told in a different way because now it's inhabited by this character named Cleitius, but there was kind of a research of talking to truck drivers, you know, and talking about their roots, and then suddenly, where I'd always thought that it would actually be a scene about a truck driver rolling down his window and holding his wallet out, it suddenly began to inhabit Cleitius, and I realized this was his story, and he was going to share it with Oscar. But then, of course, there's also just the sense of, like, if you're setting a scene somewhere, right? If it's going to be at the Met, you've got to go to the Met. Or if you're going to go to a zoo, if you're going to write about a zoo, you've got to go there. So it goes both ways. It's sometimes you know you're going to write about something and you pointedly go to that place, or you've been visiting a place, you think that it's the perfect place, and then you have to go back and research it as well. But the tricky part is finding the balance, because if you overdo the research, then you lose the creative moment. And so suddenly you realize that you become mired in this mode of thinking that's all about research and index cards, and you've lost the flow of how you're writing. The same goes with image. You can switch too far into the sort of illustrative part of your mind, and now you've kind of lost the music of how words go together. And so you have to become very friendly with yourself and with your involvement. And the same goes even for relationships, right? If you keep, you know, keep a subject recurring over and over, you begin to just sap that relationship of all of its possibilities, you know? So you have to be involved with all of it, and you have to know when the time has come to let it alone and when the time has come to press.
Thank you.
You're welcome. By the way, I'm curious, how many people here are part of the book club on Facebook? Show of hands. Oh, you guys are awesome. So this was a gift to me, my first reading in Pasadena, and it was given to me by Nate, who's in the a reading club. And I have since, he had gotten a bunch of people to sign it, and I've since been getting everyone who's part of the reading club to sign this. So if you could do me that favor, it'll be up here, and if you don't want your book signed, if you just want to come up and sign it, that's fine. And you don't have to be a huge active participant. If you've been lurking, you know, and you feel like sharing, that's fine too. So anyway, it's going with me on tour. Someone tell Nate, please. All right, question.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a fan of your Sister Poe's music, and was wondering, do you have any plans within the Familiar series to bring her music into the series, going further?
Wouldn't that be phenomenal? Yeah. That would be amazing. Yeah, that would be incredible. You know, it was, oh gosh, it was just the arrogance and amazement of youth when we did that, because you know, she was writing Haunted, and I was listening to it, and it was influencing House of Leaves. And then she would read sections, and that would influence Haunted. And it was just, we were so in sync at that point, right? And then even more so, Pantheon was incredibly encouraging in trying to make it all work out together. Atlantic was excited about the release and about touring and you know, kind of bringing them together. And so suddenly we had this thing that happened that I don't think has really happened in such concordance before or after. I mean, there's a band called Biffy Clyro who's done a CD called Only Revolutions, but that came after Only Revolutions was written. Or Circa Survived did a song inspired, I guess, partly by House of Leaves, and that was still after. So my sister and I had this amazing kind of creative relationship that was just going back and forth. And when it was over, we thought, okay, well, let's just keep doing it. That's so easy. And my sister definitely influenced Only Revolutions. She wrote songs that I listened to that influenced it, but she never released those. And then we began to discover what a rare occurrence it was. Like the stars had all aligned and our lives began to shift. So it just made a muddle of all plans. But you know, the older you get, you know, plans get muddled frequently. And so I think if it happens, it will happen because the stars once again swing into alignment, and the time will be then to say, okay, let's do it.
Hi.
Hey.
I think at some point there were plans or at least thoughts about what an ebook version of House of Leaves would look like. And I'm wondering how the exercise of thinking of adapting House of Leaves to what I consider to be a totally different format influenced the way you approached typography in the books that came afterwards, if at all.
Great question. I wouldn't say that it influenced the Familiar at all, really. My father, who was a filmmaker and also a professor, gave me some great advice early on, which is never think of the technology and how you'll use the technology to create something. Always create in your mind what you envision, and then find the technology that suits that. So I've continued to that practice. You know, I don't think in terms of what a platform is capable and then begin to design according to that platform. You know, the Familiar has this shape because I've been working on it since 2006, and that's kind of how it came together finally. The question of House of Leaves as an ebook is, it's just an incredibly exciting, terrifying idea. We did the 50-Year Sword, and we had some animations and we had some music, and that was a great deal of fun. It was a great deal of work. And then we did Only Revolutions, which I'm particularly proud of. Pantheon did an incredible job. And what was wonderful is that we left this kind of the three-dimensionality of it, of, you know, turning the book all over and, you know, this kind of, the way it lives, kind of this in this cute, voluminous world, I guess. And just made it a side-by-side narrative, which was suited for, you know, a tablet or an iPad. And then we made sure that the gender wasn't prioritized, so you could pick which gender you wanted on which side, etc. And then we got all of these roadmaps, basically, for all the elements. But it was the first kind of lesson I learned about these platforms, because we got so like involved in it that it basically can only be released via Apple. So you can only read it on an iPad. Now, Only Revolutions, I know, is incredibly difficult, but there are a lot of professors who teach it, and they really wanted this version for the classroom, right? But they cannot assign anything that's on a singular platform. So it was also a lesson about how you can put so much work into design and then realize that you're limited by a big tech company that just won't allow your material to migrate. I mean, this is still pretty incredible about how you can just get it and it works. You don't have to worry about wires or batteries. You just have to worry about the wires in your head, but otherwise, that's how it works. Yes. I'll get this one right here. Go ahead.
So, coming off of that a little bit, I actually wrote one of the essays that got me into college about how I thought House of Leaves was like a perfect testament to like medium specificity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, continuing with your books and how each one has used all these like new novel typographic elements and graphic elements, I guess what do you think the limit is of what a book can be, and how far would you go?
So the question is, what is the limit of what a book can be? He asked it so well, I'm just going to quote him verbatim. And how far could I take it? And oh, it's a pinnacle question, really, because it harkens back to your question as well, because I have noticed there is something about the books that I create that want to get beyond the page, get beyond the binding. It wants to be music. It's not by chance that there are bands that say, hey, let's something about House of Leaves is musical, you know? And as all of you who've read House of Leaves knows, it's a lot about sound. As much as you can remember the house that's shifting, it's really about how our voices inhabit this structural space. And the same is for ebooks. I mean, there's still, you know, this constant circling to do House of Leaves as a movie or a Netflix series, you know, and I've always said no. I have started to get tempted, I will say, but it's kind of that thought of like, well, what would that mean, right? And this gets back to your question of like, well, what if I did jump off and actually, and that was a part of your question that I didn't answer, which is I feel like that translating books to ebooks should be a different career. Like, it's a totally different art form. And I would be happy to turn it over and say, okay, you have done great books, now do this and tell me what you're gonna do, because you're basically a director of ebooks, right? So what would be the experience of really exploring a new media, like film or television for something like House of Leaves or any of the others? But here's my hesitation. My hesitation is that I think with any art form, you want to get to the place where the form has begun to resist itself, has begun to deny itself or claim the limitations of itself, so that a sculpture feels like it has to become something more, that it's constantly a gesture forward. And maybe that's the place to be, right? It's not to fulfill the gesture. It's not to finish, you know, the movie in 8.5. It's to leave it sort of in that place that gestures into the future, because that's when you begin to leave the form and you provide that imaginative moment for the reader or the participant to take it forward. So perhaps by doing a movie or an ebook in a different way, I would actually be defeating the book instead of letting the book live unstably like that, you know? And it's really for the reader to then carry on the next artistic movement of however that interpretive, you know, mode goes. He doesn't look convinced, but it's okay. Up front here.
When you do these, everything you do is so grand and it's scale. So then
Did you hear that? Everything I do is so grand in its scale.
Something like House of Leaves, do you confuse yourself?
Right.
Or do you have this laid out when you do this three-part frame narrative that seems so concise and everything circles back to each other?
Right.
How do you not confuse yourself?
Do I confuse myself? Constantly. If you're not confusing yourself, you're doing something wrong, right? The whole point is to head into those places that are difficult to navigate. But then you have to figure out how to navigate it. It's not going to be just with a compass. It's not going to be just with a whiteboard. It's not just going to be with a perfect process of research, you know? It's going to be something that includes how you wake up in the morning, you know? How you treat yourself, how you think, how you treat your friends, how you create order in your life that enables you to find that order, you know, in something that's difficult. But something that's worth your time will be disorienting. It will be complicated. It will overwhelm you, you know? That's where you want to go. And then you've got to put all your tools and all your calmness, you know, to work on that and make it through. So in the end, you're not so confused. This gentleman here. Oh.
Hi. You know, I was just thinking that I think the book and the structure of the book is part of the story, and trying to reproduce it in another form is actually changing the story in some way. Like, just leave it alone. Leave it where it's at.
Right.
Right? That's my thought. Like, it's not, I just want to know if you think that way.
It goes both ways, because then there's the other thought too, which is like, okay, make it an ebook or make it a song. It still doesn't change what it is. You know, that's sort of ridiculous to think that, you know, a certain piece of media is going to alter radically what preceded it. Or if it did, maybe then the time was for it to be replaced. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm disoriented, actually, about it, you know. But I keep saying no. It's been 17 years, you know, but it's still, now and then, the possibility arises, and I think, well, maybe I'll learn something. You know, maybe I would, by learning a different form, you know, that could be helpful. And I think regardless, I did some sculpting and I found it incredibly rejuvenating. I was like, you know what? Suddenly working with clay and bronze was extremely compelling, and it added a different kind of plasticity with words, which I was unprepared for, really, just by quietly working with my hands for, you know, a dozen days kind of brought to life something verbally that I wasn't expecting. So, again, I don't think it's an easy answer, but part of the time I sit exactly where you are and have the same kind of feeling, you know. Should we go, how about with the orange-red shirt here? Orangey red, blood orange, blood grapefruit.
So when you write literature that does resist like translation between mediums, I'm curious if you've ever encountered readers who are forced to do that on their own, such as a blind reader who maybe can only read audibly by having it read to them. Like, have you ever encountered blind House of Leaves readers, or maybe like someone who can't physically ship the book where they live, so they have to somehow get a PDF or ebook of it?
I have not.
Okay.
I have encountered furious readers who are colorblind, and the 50-year sword posed a lot of problems for them. I was sympathetic. I do remember working on the Braille passage, and I had to make sure that it had been done correctly. So I went to a blind institute and asked if someone would read it. And it was this wonderful woman, and she was so excited to say hello. I mean, I was no one. And she sort of led me through the halls and sat down at her desk. What do you have here? And she began to read it, and she was like, oh, this is terrible. This is so dark. This is so lonely, you know? And it was this very haunting experience as I watched those words come to life via her fingerprint. So then I had to sit down and tell her what the whole thing was. She says, it still sounds lonely and dark. One of the things I do think about, though, this is another form we haven't talked about, is the audiobook. I have more and more friends who listen to audiobooks on the train, in the car. And so the familiar is very suited for that, because they're very specific voices, so you could actually move very easily. between them. And I think you could create modulations literally in how the page was turned or something in House of Leaves. And so that certainly would be a way of answering that. And even just kind of the nuance of an effect every time house was said, right? So that it wasn't the color blue in the way that one might see it, but that it might have an aura. Maybe it's something kind of already kind of uneasy in it, you know? So I think in answer to your previous statement, here's another reason to explore another medium in a way, to make it available. Because one of the things I don't want is for something to be unavailable to others, you know? And it's the process of discovering that way is exciting. And it's more than just challenging, it's a command. So I will take your question as a godance to keep moving and expand in some direction these works. Yes, in the cat. Come on, Peter.
Thank you. For The Familiar and House of Leaves, as different as they are, they both still have like a strong narrative structure. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering why you keep going back to that after the experiment, I guess, that 50-Year Sword was, where that was just dialogue. And I want to also know, like, I guess, what went into making that.
Into the 50-Year Sword, or
yeah,
the Familiar?
Into 50-Year Sword.
Well, like I stated earlier, it's sort of the way a work arrives for me isn't at the end point. I don't really know how it looks, and so the 50-Year Sword, you know, it arrived already disassembled. It was kind of a, you know, I knew I had a sense that it was a campfire story, you know, and it was told by different voices, and that these voices were all stitched together and kind of like a Greek chorus, but not, you know. And I thought what was really compelling to me was how often we tell stories that are already stitched together. They already include the voices of many people, phrases that we learn from different, you know, from peers, from family, you know, and then we kind of give them a voice through our voice, and it seems to come out as a seamless thing, but really it's all been kind of stitched together through culture, history, through our own experiences, from other voices. So the 50-Year Sword really reflected that. There's a nod to the fact that these various narrators have their own personality, but you can't quite see them. And if you're colorblind, you can't see them at all. But if you listen to the version on YouTube, then you can hear them. So that's kind of how it worked. But I would argue that there is a narrative at the center of the 50-Year Sword, you know, and it's far more accessible than, say, Only Revolutions. But Only Revolutions is one of those things that when you begin to lock into the music, it then opens up and you understand what the road trip is all about. But I can't really tell you why I then went on to The Familiar. I think one of the things that continues to anchor me in the way a long anchor anchors a ship that will then wobble this way and that way on the swell or the tide is that I'm very concerned always with perspective, that whenever something is told, it is coming from a vantage point. It hasn't been fused together by one authorial voice, that it allows many, many different voices. Oh, right there, the bearded gentleman, yes.
Yeah, my question is about the first couple of volumes of The Familiar. You had some like really interesting like encryption puzzles to solve. I was wondering if like that all comes from you, or if you have like an outside consultant that helps you with that, because they were like pretty sophisticated and interesting.
So the question, oh, you heard the question, yes. Well, I'm glad you raised this subject. It is a question of how much I do and how much others do. And I could not have done The Familiar without others. And it was something that I arrived at when I finished Only Revolutions. I realized that there was the ultimate ego trip, voiced by two 16-year-olds. And I was like, do I want to continue in that direction? And I said I did not. And so the way the world works when you say something like that is suddenly there is a knock on the door, or there's a cry in the rain, and you have to answer it. And I ended up putting on a production for 3 years of The 50-Year Sword, which forced me to hire actors and, you know, shadow casters and musicians. And that's when the Atelier was formed. And the Familiar is very much dependent on the Atelier, as well as all the individuals that are listed in the back. And they range from translators to coders to people who are experienced and fluent in Egyptian Arabic, and to a whole array. And much to their distress, there are a few members here tonight, and I'm going to point them out. I would like to point out Regina Gonzales. Where are you? Will you stand? Can you give us more than a hand? She is the force behind the graphics. There is not a graphic in the Familiar that wouldn't have come to life were it not for Regina. She is the force that brings these incredible images to life. She oversees a lot of the artists. She works with graphic designers. She is a graphic designer, and she is also now my wife. So thank you. And then there is Michelle Rivera. Where are you? Michelle, will you stand? There we go. Michelle makes this machine work. She makes sure that, you know, that calls go through, that all of that everything is coordinated, and that this it's not a machine. I wanted to say it's a machine, but it's not oiled. It's not gears. It's an animal. You know, she makes sure the animal is fed and fit and healthy, and that it can go running around, so it doesn't just chew at the bars. You know, and she keeps me free in making sure that I can continue to write and work on all of these problems. And then Nairi, is Nairi around? Nairi, stand. Nairi, thanks to Nairi, Schnork is well and alive. And then somewhere she's disappeared is Hazel. She was wandering around here, so I can't tell you. But so there are various people that help, and they also do not. There are many who live abroad and whatnot. And so there certainly is a lot of back and forth to refine that kind of stuff. So thank you for your question.
We got time for one or two more.
One or two more. How about this other bearded gentleman?
So regarding the last few volumes of The Familiar, a lot of the characters have started to finally cross paths and interact with each other. And something I found fascinating is their visual descriptions of each other, because we really haven't had, outside of Xanther, who pretty explicitly is described often, haven't had a lot about the various characters. And I've been fascinated to see how my conceptions of them from reading tends to be pretty different from how they come off to the other characters. So I was wondering how you sort of conceived of that and planned and decided on those interactions.
That was great. It's like, you get it, man. Well, because partly is when you're dealing with, you know, the imaginative, cognitive, you know, constructs of these characters. You meet them, you know, you encounter them, you befriend them in a way that involves how they think, how they feel, how they move, and how wonderful that it's jarring to suddenly see that someone else has a different narrative construct of how they look, right? And how often do we do that to each other? You know, we think that because of the way someone looks, they have to be like this. And yet this book gives you that experience. And so part of the design was to delay that, because I knew as soon as they began to meet, they would begin to describe each other visually, because it's just the human animal is that way. So by putting that off, it allowed all the readers to have this experience of who this person was at such a level of intimacy before they became known through just sort of the almost two-dimensional retinal view that we encounter. So thanks for asking that question. How about there in the back, and then we'll circle to the front here. In glasses.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could speak to some of the concerns about writing a book that is like serialized but comes out over such a long period of time. Like at the current pace, it would finish in like 2030 something. So I'm curious how you consider like when readers are reading volume 9, how much do they remember of what happened in volume 1 if they read it when it came out and things like that. Or even just like it's set in 2014 and when volume 1 came out, that was like very current, but obviously as time passes, we get more and more distant from that particular like cultural moment, and who knows where we'll be when the series ends. So I was just curious, like, if you could speak to like.
Isn't that cool, by the way? Actually, when I was writing it, 2014 was in the future, so it is this weird moment. It's a wonderful question. I mean, I think in your question, you're answering already some of the questions that something that's this long form. You know, do you need to remember everything? You know, we like to think we remember everything about our lives, but we don't. I had this weird encounter. Sorry, I'm just going to tell a little story here where my wife and I were at a birthday party way out of town, like 3 hours out of Los Angeles. The birthday party was actually our friend's mother, so the friends were. Or no, I mean, our friend's father. So all his friends were there, so we didn't know who they were. He's in his 70s. And then all of a sudden, this woman came up to me, and I was like, she's like, Mark? And I was like, I'm sorry. And she said, it's Mary Ellen. And Mary Ellen and her brother Pat knew me when I had a summer job in Pennsylvania when I was 19 years old. And I hadn't seen her, I think I'd seen her maybe at a reading like 15 years ago. And I had no idea what she was doing there. And it turned out, you know, she was married to someone who knew, and it was just this small world experience. But the thing that was so incredible was how all these memories that I couldn't have accessed just came blindingly alive. Like suddenly I remembered all her friends, her brother. I remember what was going on at this place that I was working, and all of these details just emerged just simply with her appearance. And so I think in some ways the book itself deals with that. As you read it, you forget. Already you're forgetting. But the point is that the experience will be in that moment. I mean, I have friends who are now encouraging their friends to just read volume 5. Just jump in the middle, you know, because volume 1 starts in the middle of things anyway, and we live in the middle of things. So why believe that every book has to begin with this pat little history beginning and then end? Why not allow it? Why don't you allow yourself just to dive into it like a river? But how that will certainly play out is going to be interesting. So there you go.
Want to take one last question?
Well, let's move to the front here. All right.
Hey there. Do you know the Snowing song with your name, Mark C. Danielewski?
Someone did send that to me.
Yeah, it's a good song.
Yeah.
Since I picked up the first Familiar in May 14, I wanted to ask you about one of my favorite characters, who's Jing Jing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I love his passages because of how disorientating they are and the naked mysticism that's present there in contrast to America. And I just was wondering if you could talk about your inspirations for those passages and how you write for those. Do you write all of it and then edit into that kind of format? Or I've always been so curious.
How do I write the Jing Jing passages? Well, for those of you who don't know, Jing Jing is a recovering addict who lapses, and he lives in Singapore, and he speaks Singlish. And to really encounter and think like Jing Jing, I had to go to Singapore quite a bit, not to mention talk to Singaporean friends, not to immerse myself in sort of Malaysian culture. But I mean, you know, I've been working on The Familiar since 2006, so it's similar to like people ask about how I write Astair's, you know, passages. Do I add the parentheses later? Or Anwar uses a bunch of nested brackets. And I don't. I write immediately like that. Their voice comes alive. And so Jing Jing's voice is very much alive. And I think a lot of this, and this might even be helpful for writers, is that when you find the voice then commands the vocabulary. And so it's weird, because when you think of voice, you think of words, you know? I mean, you can think of sounds, but voice is something that precedes sound. It precedes words, and it's a nexus, I guess, of feeling, understanding, knowledge, intimacy. And so, you know, when I start writing, it's always, for me, Jingjing's always running. Like, he always has that addictive itch. And so as soon as the chapter starts, I can already feel that craving under his skin, you know, and it begins to itch my own skin in a way that I don't understand. And it does, all of these characters have there's a sense of possession that takes place. And then, you know, then the research comes. Like, there's a point where I realize, like, I know that, and then there's a point where, like, oh, I need to find that out, and I need to check that. But it doesn't really matter. It swims sort of on the surface, because underneath I know that he has to get that pale blue balloon. And how is he going to get that there? And how is he going to navigate it through whatever kind of poetic, you know, language he uses, you know? And then, of course, he's supposed to be unfamiliar. It's okay to encounter characters that you don't understand, you know? The irony is that we all kind of are most comfortable with ourselves, because we all sort of get a sense of knowing that self. But it's only one self. There's a whole portion of us that is still going on, that is inarticulate, that's unconscious, and that, you know, in serious cases can manifest itself as a, you know, as a dangerous personality or an alter personality. But how familiar are we even with our own language? You know, I'm reading a fantastic book right now called How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Feldman Barrett. It's nonfiction, and she basically is flying, you know, in the face of all sort of standard readings that talk about face, by the way, that talk about how we understand emotions in terms of the way we look and frowns, et cetera, and that these have always thought to be sort of universal traits. And basically what she's pointing out is that it's essentialism, that there is this belief that there is such a thing as sadness or fear that is hardwired into us. But what she points out is that it's all a construct. Emotions are constructs. And I won't get into exactly how she arrives at that, but I encourage you to read it. And when I was reading it, I was like, yeah, that's the familiar right there, is that it avoids that kind of essentialism. And the point is that we all have all sorts of language, all sorts of verbal cues and directions that we put in the service of our wants and our desires and whatnot. So let us end with wants and desires and sign some books. Thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you so much, Mark, for coming out to the Strand.